Welcome to Business Growth Talks, the podcast that tackles the tough realities of growing a business. I'm MarK Hayward, and if you're feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or unsure of your next steps, you're in the right place. Each week, I bring you the real strategies that successful entrepreneurs have used to push past difficulties, boost revenue, and build a stronger, more profitable business. Scaling up, keeping customers, managing cash flow, and building a team is tough, and the stakes are high. Our guests share what worked, what didn't, and the critical lessons learned along the way. Stay tuned for strategies, insights, and advice you need to tackle challenges head on and take your business to new heights. If you're ready to grow, strengthen, and succeed, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Just a quick one. I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining me today and being with me on this show. One thing that is really important I want to share with you is this show is growing really well, and I'm so proud of it, and I'm so pleased that you're enjoying this content. But if you could please hit the follow and subscribe to this channel, it will really help the channel on its being able to grow and the people that we can have on this show. So please do consider, if you have a moment, please can you hit the subscribe button and the follow button, and I would really appreciate it. Today on Business Growth Talks, we have David Schneer, who's a distinguished professional with a rich background in market research and specialized focus on non-verbal communication. As the president of Merrill Research, he has led numerous studies that delve into consumer behavior and market dynamics. Beyond his expertise in research, David is renowned for a deep understanding of body language, offering workshops and training sessions that empower business leaders to enhance their non-verbal intelligence. His unique blend of analytical acumen and insights into human behavior makes him a sought-after authority for those aiming to improve their communication skills and business strategies. Hello, David. How are you again? Because this is the second time you've been on my show. How are you doing today?
I'm awesome, and again, it's great to see you and great to be on your show.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. So we're going to do something slightly different for the second part, and it's all going to be based around body language. So I know this is a great area of your expertise, and so I'm going to be asking you some questions about body language and how, from the perspective of a business owner. So how things they can control from themselves and how they can read other people's body language. Sound good?
It sounds great. I think the lesson here is going to be once you learn how to read others, you begin to know how not to act or how to act. So it's all right in there together.
So there's a question that I was going to ask later on, but I'm going to go straight into it because I'm interested about this idea. Do you think understanding other people's body language is a way of manipulating them?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
It can be used in that way, but the idea for understanding body language is not to fool somebody, but to get to a deeper understanding, to pay attention to what their body is saying, not so much what their mouth is saying. Yeah. Because for a variety of reasons, people don't often want to tell the truth, or people are often just uncomfortable and look like they're lying, but they're not. Of course, any tool can be used for nefarious purposes, but it's certainly not to manipulate. As I just mentioned, when you begin to successfully read others, you begin to learn what to do, what not to do.
No, that makes perfect sense. It was a bit of a provocative question because I was just thinking when I was doing the research earlier that I was just thinking this could very much be used for bad purposes, for negative purposes, but when I was doing the research, you very nicely shared some slides with me. What it gave me whilst I was doing the research was a greater understanding of people's behaviors to interpret and then be able to how you convey yourself that is in a positive way, in a positive method. Yeah, it was a provocative question deliberately just to see what your response is.
No, it's a good one. I've been asked that before. And none of the things that we teach are designed to be manipulative, but they are designed to be subtle. Because you don't want to Three Stooges somebody in the eyes, right? Yeah, it can be used that way, but and probably has, especially remember our spy services are
Yes.
highly trained in this area, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Police, FBI. So there's lots of opportunity, right, for it to
Yeah.
be used for and against criminals.
Yeah. So, how did you get into body language? So we know you from the previous episode about Merrill research and about the qualitative and quantitative research that you're doing. How did you get into the whole body language and becoming such an expert in it?
It's a good question. At a very young age, I was traveling back and forth across the United States, starting from the age of 6 months to the age of 12. I had traversed the country 3 times and always was the new kid on the block and learned very quickly to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open to be accepted. But that parlayed me into a career in journalism where I began to hone things like my reporting skills, my observation skills, my writing skills. And then that led to research where I began to interview people, and I always had a sixth sense that somebody was not leveling with me, but could never really describe that until I began to study it and began to be taught by some rather significant figures in the field. And so once I began to understand body language deeply, I wanted to go out and teach it. But then I realized, wow, what a tool for research,
Mm.
for market research. And bada boom, the idea hit me, and we merged the two companies, and it hasn't been the same since. Because when you think about it, if you're a behavioral scientist and you're interviewing people face to face, it almost begs the question, why not be trained in body language? If most communication, MarK, is nonverbal,
Mm.
it's like learning another language, really. So that's
Yeah.
how I got into it.
So there's something that I was trying to think of it earlier. I think it's something like 70% of what you say is through your body language. 20% is how you look, and then 10% is actually what you say. And so the value of body language in business arenas as well as in so where that thought came from, I remember seeing Kay giving a speech in the 60s, and there was a video or something. I was reading a book about it. I can't remember, it was a long time ago, and they were saying about how what a great orator he was and how expressive and how he could convey what he wanted to get across. But this analysis was all based around his method of communicating, and that was based on non-verbal as well as what he was saying as well.
Those statistics that you just and here's how this happened. You oftentimes hear a widely quoted statistic that 90% of our communication is nonverbal. That came from a psychology professor whose last name is Morabian, and he did a study in his class amongst an all-female class, and he derived that number from that class. It was never intended
Right.
to be used as a de facto standard of
Right.
measuring nonverbal communication. I don't know how you do that. The nonverbal communications is not static, it's super fluid. And the best thing we can say, so that 90% is just not true. On the other hand, what you can say is that most communication is nonverbal. That's what I'm willing to say, because I don't know of any studies or statistics that would really measure that.
Okay. So how does
So,
Merrill research incorporate body language into what you do?
well, let's understand what Merrill Research does first. We're a methodological research firm, a custom research firm, which means that we do both types of primary research. All right, we'll take a step back. In the world of research, MarK, there's two types, there's two worlds of research. There's secondary research, and then there's primary research. Secondary research is the art of finding information that already exists on the public domain. Every time you go to the library or search on Google, you're doing secondary research, information that already exists.
Yeah.
I have clients who hire us to figure out things that don't exist in the public domain. That's primary research.
Right.
Okay. There's two types of primary research that we practice. One is quantitative. And we just got a big lesson in quantitative research here in the States as we watch the presidential elections, right? And then there's qualitative research. That's what I specialize in. Qualitative research, unlike quantitative research, which is designed to be statistically reliable and predictable, qualitative research shoots for depth of understanding.
Right.
And so my practice is basically traveling around the world, talking to people either face to face or doing what we're doing now. Okay. And when I'm talking to people in an interview situation, I'm actually watching not what comes out of their mouth, but what their body tells me. And even in a situation like this, Mark, there's so many things that would be screaming at me, right? Other people might miss it, but for me, the body talks almost more loudly than the voice.
Mm.
And using it in research helps to minimize the fact that people don't like to hurt other people's feelings. So how do we use this? I go into a focus group facility and I sit down with a person. I show them an advertisement, an ad, and I say, tell me, what do you think about it? And they say, oh, I like it. I would certainly buy it. But what their body is telling me is something completely different. Okay. And so what do I do with that information? Do I just ignore it? Or do I ask a question like, I'm getting a sense there's something more here about your reaction to this ad. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. And sure enough, if you probe deeply enough, in that particular interview that I'm thinking of, we had a woman who had a hard time saying she didn't like the product, but when she actually told us why, it was a brilliant piece of feedback.
Right.
But we had to dig for that. So that's how we use that.
Yeah. And I think it's the whole idea of understanding body language is just it's another tool that business owners and entrepreneurs can use for, we're going to come on about negotiating and team meetings and managing people and all those difficult conversations that you might be having with team members, clients, or whoever. So I think it should be viewed as another tool that a business owner should be versed in if they want to get to, if I say the truth, get to understand what people are actually communicating and actually what they want to say. Would you agree?
Oh, I would agree 100%. The thought that qualitative researchers like me aren't steeped in body language, I aim to change that. I think that needs to be changed. I think people in this profession need to be fully trained in body language. And I will be training people. But think about HR. Human resources, right? The person that you hired 2 weeks ago that seemed confident and a joy to interview ends up being way in over their head and in some cases becomes extremely toxic. Are there ways to minimize that, to catch that before you hire somebody? Were there clues or red flags or signs? Because the reality is that when you make a mistake like that and you hire somebody and you have to fix that, it costs about 30% of that person's salary to do that. It's a great example. Another profession that I think would benefit greatly from HR.
So what are the key body language myths that business owners should be aware of?
Oh, the biggest one is crossed arms. Crossed arms like this is almost universally construed as a blocking behavior, and it's not. It can
That's
be.
interesting because that's like body language 101. They assume
That's
that
right.
the crossing of the arms. But I know from my experience, in situations, and tell me the truth behind it. Sometimes when I cross my arms, it's because I'm trying to concentrate. I'm trying to understand even more. So it's a form of understanding. Tell me if
It's
I'm
a
wrong or about
no,
the, but
you're
tell me the truth of crossing arms.
what you just described is called pacification. You're
Okay.
pacifying yourself. Look, we're too old to put a ring in our mouths like we were when we were a kid. But this is a pacifying behavior. It just feels good. If you go to a movie theater, Mark, and the lights go down, you take a look around, people are just resting their arms. Now, there are signs when that becomes a blocking behavior, okay? And
Okay.
it could be that the fingers come out and start to grip. And anytime
Right.
you see grip and red knuckles turning to white, that's a
Yeah.
sure sign of stress. Subtle, but yet informative. But blocking behavior it's all about context.
Do you think that that idea of blocking behavior has now become updated? So that, and I'm making assumptions here, but when that came into sort of the knowledge that most people know of that, do you think that was an era where it was a blocking behavior, but body language has evolved? That is what I'm trying to understand is, do body language, just like verbal language, like the English language is constantly changing, is evolving and morphing into other things. Does body language change over the different eras, different decades?
There's several things that are involved in that question. One is the actual number of body language gestures that have been recorded keeps growing as we begin to use more technologies and study people longer and longer. Look, body language as a science is
Yeah.
several hundred years old. It's not new.
Mm.
Okay. And in the last 60 years, especially in this area where I am in the San Francisco Bay Area, there's a lot of guys that are practicing this. So I teach about 125 body language gestures. Okay.
Okay.
But some of these guys in BI perhaps have a database of 400 or 500 body language movements. The facial micro expressions and facial muscle movements involve thousands of muscle movements. We're just learning to track them, but I don't think they've really changed if you're asking in an evolutionary way, perhaps. But look, we have something that's still very much a part of our humanity. And that is when we become frightened, like many other animals. This is another misnomer, too. Most people think that there's two reactions to when you're frightened: to flee or fight.
Yeah.
There's actually three. It's freeze, flee, or fight. We
Okay.
freeze first, like a deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
So the science is growing. There's still a lot of misconception out there,
Yeah.
despite
So,
the
so let's
science.
explore this micro expression. So I'm thinking, first of all, define what micro expressions are and how being aware of it can help you in, for example, like negotiating a deal with a prospect or a client.
So there's numerous facial expressions, but if you're human, okay, you will exhibit 7 of these emotions or micro expressions, okay? They're very fast, okay? Split second reaction. There's 7 of them. It's contempt, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, surprise. There's one more. This always happens to me. This is the one that I miss.
It's all right.
Um, Sadness, I think, right? And then, of course, there's the blank stare, the lack of emotion, the neutral face. Okay. So there's really 8. But the key here is that these facial micro expressions cannot be controlled. They are involuntary, Mark.
Okay.
That's what makes them so powerful. How does it work? So let's say you say to me, Dave, what do you say we spend another hour and a half on my show talking about this? And I say, okay, but then I flash this. See that?
Yeah. So that was your cheek. So for the listeners, so it's your cheek raising.
I'll describe it.
Thank you.
That motion basically is the corner of my lip almost twitching up. One corner stays flat, the other goes up. And that's called contempt. And that has two meanings. When somebody does that to you, it means they are contemptuous of what you just said or of you, or they feel superior to you. So now what do you do with that? If I were you, I might say, maybe Dave doesn't really want to spend an hour and a half here.
Yeah.
Dave, how about another 20 minutes? Oh, that's better, right?
Yeah.
So you can use these cues to change the course of your engagement. So let's pretend that you do see blocking behavior. So what do you do with that? If you ignore it, right?
Yeah.
You'll never get a chance to address what it is this person is blocking about. If you get a chance and you're in person with a person who's just all blocked up, get them up. Go get a drink of water. Go take a walk. There's a reason why presidents go to Camp David to walk. It's to gain synchronicity with the body by mirroring and walking and talking and sharing. Okay. Right. So get them up. Or if you can't do that, you ask, let's stop right now. Is there anything that I can answer for you? Have any concerns? And that's when you may be able to turn a bad business endeavor into a good one because you gave the person time to address an issue. So that's how this is used.
So, yeah, it's really interesting because that whole idea of being able to pick up on these micro expressions, that in essence, what you've just described is letting the other person have space and time to really tell you what they're thinking.
That's true. It's more about letting them show me what they're thinking rather than tell me.
Okay.
Because oftentimes that is not in congruence, and that's what you're looking for, is things that are asymmetrical, because that's usually an indication of tension in the body.
Okay.
Oh.
How does someone... Another scenario, someone's having a difficult conversation, a potentially difficult conversation with an employee. How does a business owner recognize discomfort or disengagement with the conversation?
I guess if there's one thing that I want people to take away today, it is that it's very difficult to really determine when somebody's lying. You may think that you have caught a lie, but in reality, most lies are caught not in real time, but either through confession or irrefutable evidence that pops up, okay? While you can't tell if somebody's lying, you can tell if they're comfortable or uncomfortable, okay? And unfortunately, over the years, people who looked uncomfortable also looked guilty because they looked nervous or whatever, right? So a good number of people have gone to jail, and you can study this. You can look this up. A good number of people gone to jail and been exonerated for just having been looked guilty, okay? Now, how do you determine comfort versus discomfort? All right. It's a paradigm, and it's a matrix, okay?
Okay.
And on one part of the matrix, you have gravity, and then the other side of the matrix, you have proxemics. Proxemics is the study of the distance between humans.
Okay.
There's a natural band of distance that we have. With intimate folks, we're an inch or two are touching. With friends, we're a couple feet away. With colleagues, we're 6 feet away. From professors, we're 15 or 20 feet away. There's that That natural band of proxemics has been shattered with COVID, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, here's how you put gravity and proxemics together. When you are in a state of high comfort, you will show gravity-defying behavior. That means you will jump up, raise your hands. When your team scores a goal, when you go into the stadium, they don't give you a piece of paper and say, when the team scores, be sure to raise your hand.
Yeah.
They don't tell you that, right?
Mm.
Thousands of people just automatically get up. That's a
Jump up. Yeah.
high state of comfort. It's anti-gravity. Now,
Okay.
low state of comfort is just what your mother said. It's slouching. Sit up straight, Mark. There's a reason for that, because slouching, and the slouching can be on the face, the body, the whole body can slouch. That's again, not gravity defying. Gravity's taking over. That's a person that's in duress. The other side is proxemics. When we are very close to somebody and in good rapport with them, we will generally be closer to them. If not, we're generally far away. Okay, so how do you put this all together? So let's say you walk into a room, walk into a conference room. Everybody's not sitting yet, but they're standing around, they're dispersed, leaning up against the wall, slouching down on their phones. If that were me, I would walk into a room like that and I think, my spidey senses begin to tingle. It doesn't look like there's nobody seems to be gelling, right? As opposed to walking into a conference room where people are closer together, they're in little pods and they're conversing, right?
Yeah.
But there's some buzz and some noise and everybody's engaging. That's a sign that you're going to be walking into a nice environment. Simple things like that.
And I was thinking about this, what you were saying, the aspect of when a leader walks into a room with their employees and they've got, I'm thinking of an example in my corporate career, and you've got a long table, you've got maybe like 6-8 people in that scenario. What used to happen was the leader would sit at the top of the table. So like a father figure, sit at the top of the table. But just thinking back to these examples, what I found, the best leaders sat right in the middle and had everyone surrounding them, around them on that larger table. And that meant there was a greater connection. It felt like there was a greater connection with the leader in that scenario rather than the formality of sitting at the top of the table directing the whole audience. Is that a way that you can, as a business owner, as a leader of people, actually gel the team together, create respect, but create it in a rapport rather than a formality, sort of formal way?
That's a really good question. Let me park that for a minute. You see the pose that I'm in?
Yes.
Okay. Oftentimes, you walk into a room, you can tell who the leader is because they're doing this. And this is a form of hooding, like a cobra snake, right?
Right.
And the idea is to make yourself look larger. Now, if subordinates are in the room and they're doing this, once the leader walks in, they'll quickly drop their arms.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've seen leaders, really good, engaging leaders, sit at the front of the table, and I've seen others do it at a round table. The key is, to listen and to watch, so that as a leader, you want to make sure that what you're saying is being understood. And is everybody singing from the same song sheet here, right? Is there any dissent? You might not hear dissent, but you might see it. And if you see it, that's an indication that to go forward and say, okay, is there any disagreement here? Now, let's say you and I are negotiating, and let's say we're at a glass table. By the way, I highly recommend, if you have a conference room, get swivel chairs and glass tables. You want to see the feet and lower extremities. But here's a tip. You're talking to a candidate about a very important job, and you're asking them about their confidence. okay? And all of a sudden, you see the palms of their hands start to rub on their thighs, okay? That is a sign of tension. It's a huge sign or signal that they're not comfortable with this job. Those are the kinds of things that you want to be looking for. Pressed lips, even the shoulders are beacons of information.
Okay. How?
How?
Yeah, how are the
Well,
shoulders?
all right. So let's say you ask me a question. You say, Dave, where's that package I asked you to send out? And I say, I don't know. Let me go check. I think it went out, right? As opposed to, I don't know. Right? Now, the first indication was an asymmetrical shoulder shrug,
Yeah.
which indicates that there's tension between what this guy's thinking, which is he has no clue where your package is and he doesn't want to tell you.
Mm.
Okay. Whereas a symmetrical shrug, you can trust somebody that does a symmetrical shrug. Those are leaning in. When somebody's really excited, they lean in. When not, they'll lean away. They'll lean to the side, which is why we want swivel chairs. And watch them squirm, Mark. So
How has Zoom and COVID, now we're working a lot more remotely on Zoom or whatever package you're using, how has that changed anything? It must be harder for people to interpret body language without being able to see the legs shaking or the palms sweaty or something like that. How has Zoom changed body language for people?
in every way, but you'd be surprised what a 4K camera can pick up. And it can pick up a lot. So yeah, any day of the week, I'd rather talk to somebody in person, face to face, than this. Okay, but it is what
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
and we've actually found some surprising things doing Zoom interviews that we
Okay. What have you
would
found?
have. Oh, hang on there. We would have never found had we been in a focus group environment. All right. So the example is this. When the pandemic hit, we were doing research face to face over the Zoom. And usually behind people, they would have posters or pictures of loved ones or sports memorabilia
Mm.
or a shotgun or all sorts of things. They'd have a cat walk across the desk while they're talking. They'd have kids bouncing around. And you could really get a flavor for who they really were, as opposed to having them come to an antiseptic lab focus group
Mm.
facility, right? So we got to learn quite a bit and quite revealing.
Yeah.
But,
I,
and doctors are now using Zoom, right, to interview patients.
mm.
So now it's spread just beyond business, but every day they come up with another tool, Mark, that helps this experience. So
And imagine the micro expressions on people's faces are one of the key indicators for Zoom whilst using Zoom. Is that right?
yeah, that to the trained eye you can see a lot. But again, the torso is a huge billboard of information. The way it's bladed, the way it's angled, the shoulder blades you just got done talking. Here's one. This area here, Mark, this indentation,
Mm.
if your listeners and viewers want to do that's called a suprasternal notch.
Okay.
And people who are nervous or concerned or frightened will cover it like this, usually women. Okay. The other thing you want is to watch for is a hard swallow. You
Mm.
say something to somebody and they're literally trying to swallow it, and you can see
So
it.
that's showing stress or tension
Stress.
or
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah. Pressed lips, right? You look at somebody and their lips get whiter and whiter, and you can gauge their anger by the color of the whiteness of their lips. Some pressure is, I'm not kidding. In some people, or even galvanic skin response, sweat.
Mm.
People start to sweat when they're uncomfortable. So there's a lot of different things that make people look like they're lying, but may not actually be lying.
Mm. That's why we need you and your sort of support on this.
Look, Even professionals. There was a famous study done by Dr. Paul Ekman out here at USF, and he was doing studies on lying among students.
Right.
And what he learned was that about half the time, students got the lying correct. That's no better than a coin toss, right? And the critics began to say, oh, it's because you're using students. Students don't know anything. They haven't been out in the real world. Let's do this amongst the professionals. So they went out and they did it with cops, judges, lawyers, all people in law enforcement, people that should know how to judge people. And they did better, but statistically not. The students were at 54%. The experts were at 56%.
Okay, so
And
there's very little difference.
you know what? There really isn't. And here's why. People, and this gets really deep into deception theory, but we're exposed to hundreds of lies per day. Most of them are innocuous. No, you don't look fat, Mark. Those types of those lies, but it's very difficult to determine. People are really good liars, and they're also very gullible. They're poor lie detectors. It's a bad match.
Right. So people are
And
good liars and
there's
people are difficult to read
in
so
addition
far.
to my book, I talk about this in Backbone. In addition to Backbone, your readers ought to get a book by Timothy R. Levine, a professor of sociology at the University of Tuscaloosa, Alabama. He wrote a book called Duped.
Okay.
And it'll scare you when you read it, about the amount of deception that goes on and how he measured it and how it was different, how other people measured it. The bottom line is he talks about we default to giving people the benefit of the doubt. That's our default.
Right.
Because if we don't, how would we get along? I got to give you the benefit of the doubt, Mark, because we would never get together and have trust if we didn't. So that's how that works.
No, that's interesting. The thing I'm thinking about at the moment, and I want to get on to mirroring in a minute, but I was just thinking, so when you've got people on, just a really bad example, but people on breakfast television. So you've got hosts there, and I'm just thinking of people like on television or something like that that are interviewing someone. Are these guys that are on national television doing interviews and things like that, are they ever taught about how to, as you say, lean in if you're went to interest, to show people you're interested? Because as an interviewer myself, I'm generally interested in most of the people that I speak to, so I'm making an effort. But with people that are on television and they're talking about things, are these people being trained as a media person, like media training? You think of sports people as well when they're being interviewed after sports games. Are these people actually being media trained, and in that is body language part of it?
For some, the vast majority of journalists out there are likely trained, and I'm talking about broadcast journalism, are likely trained in speaking, okay, voice, delivery, all those kinds of things, but they're not likely trained in reading like I might be. Law enforcement, completely different story.
Yeah.
They're using all sorts of techniques, and as you see on TV, when good cop, bad cop, and the guy comes in and beats the guy up, and rarely going to get results that are useful from something like that. You're more likely to get results that are treating a lying serial killer with respect. It sounds odd, but if you want to get that truth, you got to make these people trust you and feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
Like you.
Mirroring.
So you do this in your podcasting. You have that demeanor about you where, you're trustworthy and people want to share because your questions are thoughtful and the way you deliver them indicates that you really care. So that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Mirroring. So when you've got two people that are mirroring each other's gesture, Is that a surefire sign of that there's rapport and that person is enjoying that conversation? Is it always that?
Can't say always that, but the idea of mirroring is if you're trying to engage with somebody verbally, all right, there's a way to engage with your body that is automatic and unconscious, but signals cohesion and cooperation, and that's mirroring. It's called
Okay.
exopraxism, and that's Greek for same behavior. And what exopraxism teaches is that if you're talking to someone and they lean in, you lean in. Ideally, the best way to do this is sitting on a couch. They cross their legs, you cross their legs. They lean in, you lean in. They cock their head, you cock their head. Now, to me, it just totally comes naturally. When you try to do this at first, it seems awkward and you may seem like a silly parrot if you try too hard. But it matters. And sometimes it happens. Go to the beach sometime and watch couples walk down the pathway or on the beach.
So I was
They'll
just
have
thinking
this,
of relationships, because that's a
yeah,
sure that most people that are in love and in that sort of state, they mirror each other's body gestures,
right.
don't they?
You remember the famous picture of Melania Trump and Donald Trump
Yeah.
when they were holding hands with pinkies like this?
What does that
That's
mean?
that's called a distal touch. It's a
Okay.
distal touch, and it's an indicator of stress, as opposed
Okay.
to holding hands like this,
Yeah.
which is a palmar touch. So, yeah, body language is not just about the body. Logos are nonverbal intelligence. Unintelligible body noises like gasps or cathartic exhales are indicators of stress. There's a lot going on. Tone of voice.
Yeah, tone of voice is also very true. I wanted to talk about eye contact as well. So again, I'm thinking like people in relationships and people that are friends with each other. There's a lot of eye contact with people, and people that are less comfortable will often look down or look away. What is the importance of eye contact when it comes to, let's think of it in a business environment, like how would eye contact with a superior, would that be a positive, or is that or equally challenging behavior?
You want eye contact for sure. In fact, Mark, what we're seeing amongst the younger generation of kids that have had their noses buried in their smartphones is that they're very poor at eye contact. Now,
Right.
can you imagine interviewing
Mm,
and having poor eye contact?
yeah.
Look, eye movements are highly idiosyncratic and very cultural.
Right.
Blink rates are different. Eye gaze length is different in Asian countries.
Okay. So
Many
culture
are
does make a
taught to look
difference.
down as a sign of reverence and respect, not to look somebody in the eyes in a challenging way. In
Right.
the West, it's a little bit different, right? There used to be this misnomer that, oh, if they're looking down, they're looking towards hell, they're lying. And if they're looking up, they're looking towards heaven. They're telling the truth. None of that is true. That's all. People think differently. Some
Mm,
move their head
mm.
this way, some move their head. It may be indicative of absolutely nothing.
Okay. There's 2 points I want to get in before the end. And one is about how does someone use body language gestures to project confidence when they're maybe doing a presentation or whether they're doing a talk to someone. What's the best ways of being able to try and project that sort of authority and confidence?
Uh, some of the things that I noticed you've been doing, I noticed that occasionally you blade your hands like this. This is called the pyramid.
Okay.
And studies show that when speakers use the pyramid to make their points, that they are perceived more credible and more likable than people that don't.
Okay.
So you can
So
use hands
in
together. Yeah, it's like
that
praying,
or
right?
like that, or is it only it's in that sort of method? Right. Okay.
Just nice, relaxed hands together like you're praying.
Yeah.
You can do that, or you can fold your fingers down in and do a half steeple, it's called. But
Okay.
steepling is a way to go. Do not point at people, Mark. People
Okay.
don't like to be pointed at.
Okay.
Rather, as I point, rather, they like to see that blade. Use the blading, okay? Stay away from laser pointers unless you have a cat. Cats love laser pointers, but they take attention away from you.
And the other thing,
Uh,
so another thing that's just popped into my head is Tony Blair, UK Prime Minister, and
mhm.
he was perceived to have authority and confidence because he did this sort of gesture. It wasn't angled, it wasn't steepled. It was like bending the thumb into his hand while making a gesture. Is that right? Does that show authority and confidence as well?
It can. The thumb exposure is a great indicator of confidence. Usually, when the thumb is out, confidence is up. If you see the thumb in, like that's not a good sign. But as long as it's symmetrical, the other thing you can do is take your hands and do what is called holding the ball.
Yeah,
And this is was coined after Steve Jobs, who used to do this. What made him
yeah,
so effective is that he would hold the ball with his hands, invisible ball, in front of
yeah.
his mouth, maybe and giving the words form as they came out.
Yeah.
Very
Is that
effective.
a controlling? Are you controlling what you're saying? Or because it feels like to me that they're like trying to make sure the message that's coming out of their mouth is
Yeah,
perceived
you're
in the right way.
absolutely you're trying to give these words some concrete form. And when you do that, it does that. Or Bill Clinton, he used to do the Clinton box.
Yeah.
Okay? He's an example of a guy that was a horrible public speaker as governor of Arkansas. Too
Okay.
long, arms flailing. He got trained
Right.
and groomed before seeking the U.S. presidency.
Interesting. Interesting.
Uh,
The last major point that I want to talk about is a handshake.
mm,
So I was always taught by my parents, you need to have a firm, strong handshake. You don't want to be a sort of flappy hand when you're shaking hands. But does a firm handshake always show sort of an element of confidence? Can you hold on to the hand too tightly? Like what when we're doing these sort of situations in real life, what is a good handshake and how should one do that?
what you've been told by your parents is what millions of people have been told by their parents, and unfortunately, it's not quite right. Look,
Oh, okay.
the handshakes are generally the first time you touch somebody you don't know. Okay. So you want to get it right. And what we teach and what other experts teach is give what you get. Okay.
Okay.
And here's
Interesting.
why because handshakes like eye gaze are highly cultural. Go to Utah and you will get what's called a Mormon handshake.
Okay. What's that?
And that's a really firm grip and a like you're sawing a tree.
Yeah.
Okay. Go to Brazil or go to Russia and you'll do an embrasio, a hug. Okay. Go to Asia and people are taught to have a very soft handshake. It's
Okay.
cultural. All right. Some people don't shake hands at all.
You got Japanese
Women,
cultures bowing, haven't you? That's another.
there's that, but and when you go to Japan, make sure your shoes are clean because part of what's happening when the Japanese are bowing is they're checking your shoes to see what kind of person does the shoes match the sole, so to speak.
Right. Right.
So, uh, but in some Muslim countries, women do not touch men they're not related to or married to, so they don't shake hands.
Right.
So in this
Okay.
case, they'll do this. So it's very important. And one thing that you never want to do is do the politician's handshake, where you grab the hand and then you take the other hand and you put it on there.
Oh, bad, is it?
The studies show people hate that. Save that for your grandma. It just it's bad form as a handshake.
We're
etiquette.
coming to the end, David, and I just want to ask you one last question, and that is, what is there that I haven't asked you that I should have asked you about body language?
Wow. How to be trained. What do you do? How do you become more ingrained in body language? I don't think we discussed that.
Okay.
So there's ways you can do that. You can become trained. There's guys like me that are out there training. You become certified, like I have been. Okay. Or you can read a lot of really good books out there. You can read by Joe Navarro, What Every Body is Thinking. It's a great book. Of course, I just have to plug Backbone, of course. And by the way, I was trained by Joe Navarro, who wrote that book, and he's in my book, and he also endorsed it, which was great. The other thing
So
you
there
can
is
do,
reading literature. I assume there'll be
yeah,
YouTube videos. There'll be people out
all day
there that are
long.
sharing information. So we should be, as a way of enhancing the experience for other people, i.e. interacting with us, we should be getting versed on those things. Reading books, YouTube, get trained by you or by
Yeah.
someone else, get certified. But this is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, but equally don't know where to find the information about that. So shout out to your book as well. It's just been relatively recently released. Why don't you just tell me a little
Yeah.
bit about the book before we close off?
Backbone is an unusual book. It's not your father's business book. It's a book on my profession that we talked about earlier, qualitative research, and what I think it takes to actually do this job at a high corporate level. And in the book, I weave my life experiences, like always being the new kid on the block, to the 7 salient traits of a qualitative researcher. And in the book, we talk about curiosity, preparedness, synthesizing complexity, listening with your eyes and body language, being open to change. All these things you need to be steeped in, be a people person with curiosity, all that you need to have boiled up into this job that I do. And so
And that book's on Amazon. It's everywhere, is
it
it?
is. It's on Amazon. You can search for Schneer and Backbone. It also tells the story of my resilience after undergoing 5 spinal surgeries, which is why we named it Backbone. I highly recommend it. You can also go on my LinkedIn site, direct message me. There's tons of stuff on my LinkedIn site, things you can read, and the Merrill Research site. A lot of free stuff out
Amazing.
there.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure delving into body language and how, as a business person, we should be getting clued up on this. So I would definitely reach out to David if you've got any questions. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Pleasure.